Welcome to Life Stories 1, where we share the true tales behind the headlines, the moments that redefine lives. Today, we delve into a story of integrity, betrayal, and the hidden dangers lurking behind seemingly ordinary walls. Meet Curtis Bell, a man who dedicated 2 decades to ensuring the safety of homes across Phoenix, managing subcontractor compliance for the sprawling Hollowgate systems. He was the unseen architect, the silent guardian of every beam, every wire, every pipe. His meticulous work kept buildings standing and lawsuits at bay. But then, a new wind blew through Hollowgate. A fresh-faced vice president, Jacob Morrison, arrived, preaching modern efficiency and eyeing shortcuts. Curtis, a guardian of standards, was suddenly deemed obsolete, replaced by an inexperienced newcomer, Trevor Banks. This isn't just a story about a job lost. It's about the fight for safety, for what's right. Before we dive deeper into Curtis's incredible journey, make sure to subscribe to Life Stories 1 and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our powerful true stories. The news hit Curtis like a ton of bricks. 20 years of unwavering dedication to Hollowgate systems, reduced to a terse conversation and a handshake from HR. Walking out of the Phoenix office building, past the sprawling Sunrise Hills development where he'd poured his expertise into every foundation and frame, a profound sense of betrayal settled in. He couldn't shake the image of Jacob Morrison, fresh from some corporate office in Denver, confidently occupying his old desk, spouting buzzwords about optimization while never meeting his eye. It was clear what Jacob's modern efficiency truly meant: cutting corners, hiring cheap, and prioritizing profit over people's safety. Curtis had learned his trade from the ground up, starting with Hollowgate right out of trade school. He'd worked his way from assistant project manager to compliance supervisor, mentored by old-timers who preached that compromising on construction was like compromising on surgery. Someone always paid the price later. His father, a union electrician for 37 years, had instilled in him a deep respect for the trade, for the electrical code, and for the simple fact that families would be living in the structures they built. "Every wire you approve could kill somebody's kid," his dad used to say. "Every shortcut you allow could burn down somebody's life." These words echoed in Curtis's mind as he drove home, the sinking feeling in his gut confirming that this wouldn't end well for anyone. The warning signs had been evident for months. Jacob Morrison, upon his arrival in February, immediately began scrutinizing every established procedure. Why 3 bids for electrical work? Why couldn't they use the same plumber for every house? Why did inspections take so long? Curtis had patiently explained that code compliance wasn't bureaucracy, it was safety. Quality contractors cost more because they did the work right the first time, and inspections caught problems before they became disasters. Jacob would nod, but his eyes were always calculating something else: cost per square foot, days to completion, profit margins. The first major red flag appeared in April, when Jacob asked Curtis to reconsider a rejection he'd made on an electrical contractor. The contractor, though technically licensed, had a reputation for shoddy work, loose connections, improper grounding, and junction boxes that looked like they'd been wired by a novice. "Maybe we're being too rigid," Jacob had suggested. "Maybe we need to give people second chances." Curtis stood his ground, finding a different electrician who, while costing $800 more, actually understood the difference between a neutral wire and a ground wire. Jacob signed off, but Curtis saw him making a note in his folder, a quiet mark against his defiance. By June, Jacob was questioning every decision Curtis made, and by August, he was even CCing Trevor Banks on all of Curtis's emails. Trevor would ask follow-up questions that clearly demonstrated his lack of understanding, yet Jacob treated him like a protege, grooming him for a role Curtis knew was critical to safety. The only person who seemed to truly notice the dangerous shift was Bill Santos, the senior project manager, who had been with Hollowgate longer than anyone could remember. "Watch yourself, Curtis," Bill warned him in July. New guys looking for reasons? Curtis should have listened harder. The true extent of the betrayal unfurled just 3 days after Trevor Banks officially took over Curtis's position. Curtis was methodically cleaning out the last of his desk drawers, packing away 20 years of invaluable knowledge, which electricians to trust, which plumbers were reliable, which framers meticulously followed blueprints, when his phone vibrated. It was Claire, his wife, calling from the city building department. Her voice was tinged with an unusual urgency. "Curtis, are you still working on the Sunrise Hills project?" she asked. "No. Why?" he replied, a knot forming in his stomach. "Because someone just submitted a change order for the electrical contractor," Claire explained. "They're switching from Martinez Electric to some company called Valley Wire Services, and the application lists you as the approving supervisor." A chilling sensation washed over Curtis. He had never approved any such change, let alone heard of Valley Wire Services. "I never approved that change," he stated, his voice tight. "The signature looks like yours," Claire responded, her tone suggesting a shared disbelief. Without hesitation, Curtis drove straight to City Hall. Claire, a city inspector with an eagle eye for detail, pulled up the paperwork on her computer. She turned the screen so he could see. There, starkly visible, was his signature, or at least something meticulously crafted to fool a busy clerk. The application requested approval to replace Martinez Electric, a licensed contractor Curtis had worked with for 7 years, with Valley Wire Services. "Run their license number," Curtis instructed, his jaw clenched. Claire typed it in, waiting for the database to load. Her expression shifted from professional inquiry to profound concern as she read the results. "Curtis, this license was suspended 6 months ago. Multiple violations for improper installation, failure to pull permits, and—" She trailed off, her eyes widening. "And what?" Curtis pressed. "And working without supervision," Claire finished, looking up at him. "The owner, Danny Vance, had his master electrician certification revoked in 2021. They stared at each other across the desk. Curtis's forged signature on paperwork he'd never seen, approving a contractor he'd never evaluated, a contractor who wasn't legally allowed to do the work. "Someone forged my signature to hire an unlicensed electrician," Curtis declared, the words feeling heavy and hollow. Claire, understanding the gravity of the situation, printed out everything: the fraudulent change order, the license suspension notice, the extensive violation history. Curtis folded the papers and carefully tucked them into his jacket pocket. Driving back across town, his mind raced to Lot 6 at Sunrise Hills. Electrical rough-in was scheduled for this week. If Danny Vance was doing the work, he'd be running wire through walls that would be covered with drywall next week. A permanent installation by someone who had already been caught doing it dangerously wrong. Families would be moving into those houses by Christmas. Kids would be sleeping in bedrooms wired by a man who'd lost his license for dangerous work. He knew he couldn't ignore this. This wasn't about his hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. It was about the safety of innocent families. Curtis sat in the cab of his Ford, parked outside Hollowgate's office, watching Trevor Banks through the window. Trevor was on the phone, likely discussing projects he couldn't possibly understand, making decisions that would impact people's lives. Jacob Morrison had replaced Curtis to save money and give his friend a job, but they had undeniably crossed a line. This wasn't merely a corporate reshuffle. It was a matter of public safety. 3 families, innocent and trusting, would soon be relying on electrical work performed by someone entirely unqualified. This demand for a response was undeniable. He started the engine, not driving home, but toward the State Licensing Board office. The Arizona Registrar of Contractors' office, a bland government building located 20 minutes from his house, was a familiar sight. He'd been there countless times over the years for continuing education classes or license renewals, but never to file a complaint against his own company. This was uncharted territory. Yet a necessary step. He walked into the compliance division and asked for Margaret Torres. Margaret, a tough woman in her 50s, was a seasoned veteran who had seen every construction scam imaginable. She listened intently as Curtis explained the situation, detailing his termination, the forged paperwork, and the discovery of Valley Wire Services' suspended license. She meticulously examined the documents, running the license numbers through her database as he spoke. "You said you were replaced 3 days ago?" Margaret asked, her gaze sharp. "Officially, yes," Curtis confirmed. "But they used my name on paperwork dated yesterday." Margaret made careful notes on a yellow pad. "How long has this new supervisor been in the construction industry?" she inquired, her voice betraying a hint of skepticism. "As far as I know, never," Curtis replied, the irony not lost on him. "Business degree, no field experience, and he approved work by a contractor whose license was suspended, or had someone else forge my signature to approve it." Margaret leaned back in her chair, a pause that spoke volumes. 27 years in the compliance division had taught her to spot patterns. Companies that cut corners usually did so everywhere, and supervisors who approved unlicensed work typically had reasons that led back to money. "Curtis, I'm going to be straight with you," she began. "This triggers a mandatory site inspection. If we find unlicensed work in progress, the project gets red-tagged immediately. Work stops until everything's brought into compliance." "How long does that usually take?" Curtis asked, his mind already picturing Jacob Morrison's furious reaction. "Depends on what we find," Margaret replied. "Could be a few days if it's just paperwork. Could be months if they have to rip out walls and start over." He imagined Jacob Morrison's face, Trevor Banks trying to explain his disastrous decisions, and the Sunrise Hills project grinding to a halt. "There's something else," Margaret added, her voice softening slightly. "If this complaint leads to significant violations, the state considers hiring the original supervisor as a consultant for the remediation. Someone who knows the project, understands the issues, can help bring everything back into compliance." She handed him a form. "Official complaint against Hollowgate Systems for use of unlicensed contractors and fraudulent approval documentation." Curtis signed his real signature at the bottom, his resolve firm. "How long before the inspection?" he asked. "Could be tomorrow," Margaret replied. "Could be next week. We don't announce these things." Driving home, Curtis thought about the timing. If Valley Wire Services had already started work on Lot 6, the electrical rough-in would be half-finished by now. Danny Vance would be running wire through walls, installing junction boxes, connecting circuits to the main panel, all without proper permits, without proper supervision, all in blatant violation of state law. Claire was in the kitchen grading papers from her afternoon classes. She taught electrical engineering at the community college and knew the code as well as any inspector. "How did it go?" she asked. Curtis told her about the complaint, the mandatory inspection, and the possibility of consulting work if violations were found. "You think they'll find violations?" Claire asked, looking at him intently. "I think Trevor Banks doesn't know the difference between a licensed electrician and someone who watched YouTube videos," Curtis replied. "And I think Jacob Morrison doesn't care, as long as the work gets done cheap." Claire looked up from her papers, her gaze unwavering. "You could have just walked away," she said. "Found another job. Let them deal with their own mistakes." "Could have," Curtis agreed. "But you didn't." "No," he confirmed. Claire went back to grading, but Curtis caught her smiling. 20 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the look he got when someone pushed too far. The look that said he was done being reasonable. His phone buzzed. It was a text message from Bill Santos. "Heard Trevor hired some outfit called Valley Wire for Lot 6. You know anything about them?" Curtis typed back, "Looking into it." The inspection would happen when it happened, but word was already getting around that the new compliance supervisor was making questionable decisions. Other project managers were starting to ask questions, starting to double-check contractor approvals, starting to wonder what else might be wrong. Trevor Banks was about to learn that construction was a small industry where reputation mattered more than business degrees. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, 2 days after Curtis had filed the complaint. It was Margaret Torres, her voice official and carefully measured. "Curtis, we need you at the Sunrise Hills site in 1 hour. Bring your documentation." He dressed quickly, grabbed the folder of paperwork Claire had printed, and drove through the desert dawn, his mind racing with possibilities of what the state inspectors might have found. The Sunrise Hills development was buzzing with unexpected activity when he arrived. 3 state vehicles were parked at different lots, and inspectors with clipboards and cameras meticulously documented everything. Margaret met him at the site trailer, where Trevor Banks sat across from 2 compliance officers, looking like a man who'd just discovered that business school hadn't prepared him for this kind of conversation. "Curtis, we need you to verify some information," Margaret began. "According to our records, you approved electrical work by Valley Wire Services on Lot 6. According to the contractor, you also approved them for Lots 9 and 12. Curtis felt his stomach drop. Lots 9 and 12 hadn't been part of his original complaint. If Trevor had hired Danny Vance for multiple houses, the violations were far more widespread and dangerous than he had initially imagined. "I never approved Valley Wire for any work," Curtis stated firmly. "I'd never even heard of them until 3 days ago." Margaret then presented him with 3 sets of paperwork, all bearing signatures that looked remarkably like his, all approving Valley Wire Services for electrical rough-in work on different lots. The dates on these documents spanned 2 weeks, including approvals allegedly signed after he had been removed from the project. "The plot thickens," remarked Inspector Rodriguez, a heavy-set man with 2 decades of experience walking construction sites. "We found active electrical work on all 3 lots. No permits pulled, no supervision present, and the guy doing the work couldn't produce a valid license when we asked." Trevor Banks finally spoke, his voice strained. "I was told the contractor was fully licensed. I checked the paperwork myself." "Which paperwork?" Margaret asked, her gaze unwavering. Trevor fumbled through a folder and pulled out a photocopy of an electrical license. The license number matched Danny Vance, but the expiration date had been blatantly altered. Someone had changed 2021 to 2024 with a pen and then made photocopies of the altered document. "Where did you get this?" Inspector Rodriguez demanded. "Danny gave it to me when I hired him," Trevor stammered. "Said there might be a delay in the database updating his renewal." Curtis almost felt sorry for Trevor. He'd been played by a suspended contractor who had found an inexperienced supervisor willing to believe obvious lies. But that fleeting sympathy evaporated when he thought about the families who would have been living with these illegally installed electrical systems. Inspector Rodriguez handed Curtis a hard hat. "Curtis, we need you to walk through these houses with us. Tell us what you see." Lot 6 was a disaster. Electrical boxes were mounted incorrectly. Wire gauges didn't match circuit requirements. Junction splices were made with electrical tape instead of proper connectors. Danny Vance had been performing the work of a licensed electrician with the skills of someone who had never even glanced at the electrical code. Lot 9 was even worse. The main panel installation violated at least 6 different code sections. Circuits were overloaded, grounding was improper, and the service entrance looked like it had been installed by someone who'd learned electrical work from a coloring book. Lot 12 wasn't finished yet, but what was there followed the same alarming pattern of dangerous shortcuts and code violations. "How long to bring this into compliance?" Curtis asked Rodriguez. "Best case scenario, 6 weeks, Rodriguez replied. "If we can find qualified electricians to redo everything. Worst case, tear down to the studs and start over." Margaret made notes while they talked. 3 houses red-tagged. Work stopped immediately. Contractor referred to the state attorney general for operating without a license and document fraud. "Trevor," she said, turning to the man who'd replaced Curtis. You're suspended from approving any electrical work pending a full investigation of your qualifications and training. Curtis watched Trevor Banks realize that his first week as compliance supervisor might very well be his last. The full extent of Jacob Morrison's efficiency had been brutally unveiled. The Hollowgate office felt distinctly different when Curtis walked in that afternoon. Word had spread like wildfire about the state inspection, the red tags, and the impending investigation. Jacob Morrison's office door was firmly closed, but Curtis could hear his agitated voice through the walls, likely explaining to corporate headquarters why a major project had been abruptly shut down by the state. Bill Santos, the senior project manager, met Curtis at the reception desk, a wide grin stretching across his face. "Curtis, you beautiful bastard," Bill exclaimed, almost unable to contain his glee. "How did you know?" "Know what? That Trevor's electrical contractor was a fraud? The whole office is talking about it." Curtis maintained a neutral expression. "Just heard about the inspection this morning," he said. "Shame they found violations." Bill nodded, but his eyes conveyed that he knew exactly what had transpired. 24 years in construction had taught him to distinguish between bad luck and careful planning. "State investigators want to talk to everyone who worked on approvals for Sunrise Hills," Bill continued. "They'll probably want your input since you managed the project for 8 months." "Happy to help if they ask," Curtis replied, a subtle satisfaction in his voice. An hour later, Margaret Torres called. The state was forming a remediation team to assess the full scope of violations at Sunrise Hills and determine what work needed to be redone. They specifically wanted an experienced compliance supervisor to consult on bringing everything back up to code. "The pay is $300 a day plus expenses," she informed him. "Probably 6 weeks of work, maybe 8, depending on what else we find." Curtis did the math in his head. A minimum of $18,000 for consulting work that would take him through Christmas. More money than he had made in 3 months at Hollowgate. And he would be working directly with state inspectors, not with business school graduates who thought electrical codes were mere suggestions. "When do I start?" he asked. "Monday morning," Margaret replied. "Report to the site trailer at 7 o'clock a.m. Claire was cooking dinner when Curtis got home, with Rebecca helping with vegetables while recounting some drama from volleyball practice. It was a normal family scene, a comforting anchor amidst the upheaval of his professional world that had been turned upside down and then, miraculously, right side up again. "The state wants me to consult on fixing the Sunrise Hills mess," Curtis told Claire. "How long?" she asked. 6 to 8 weeks. Good money." Rebecca looked up from chopping peppers. "Dad, does this mean the people who replaced you screwed up?" "Language," Claire warned, but she was smiling. "Yes," Curtis confirmed. "They screwed up pretty badly." "Good," Rebecca declared. "I never liked that Jacob guy anyway. He was rude to you at the company picnic." Smart kid, Curtis thought. She'd picked up on Jacob Morrison's attitude long before he had fully admitted it to himself. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Curtis, this is Danny Vance. Need to talk to you about this inspection thing. Can we meet?" He showed the message to Claire. "The unlicensed electrician wants to meet with you," she observed. "Seems like it. Are you going to talk to him?" "Probably not," Curtis said. "But I'll definitely forward this to Margaret Torres. Might be interesting to see what he wants to discuss." He forwarded the message to Margaret with a note. "The contractor who used my forged signature is trying to contact me directly. Thought you should know." Her reply came 5 minutes later. "Do not meet with him. Screenshot everything and forward any additional contact. This could be witness tampering." Witness tampering. Curtis hadn't thought about it that way, but Danny Vance reaching out directly suggested he was worried about more than just losing a job. He was worried about criminal charges. Trevor Banks had been played by a con artist, but Jacob Morrison had created the conditions that made the con possible. Both of them were about to learn that cutting corners in construction carried consequences that couldn't be managed away with business school theories. Monday morning, Curtis would be back at Sunrise Hills, but this time, working for the state instead of Hollowgate Systems. Sometimes, the system actually worked. The final meeting happened at Hollowgate's main conference room 3 weeks after the state investigation began. Corporate executives from Denver, lawyers in expensive suits, and insurance representatives trying to calculate the true cost of this disaster filled the room. Jacob Morrison sat at the far end of the table, looking like a man who'd just discovered that his shortcuts had been meticulously documented by state investigators for weeks. Trevor Banks wasn't there. He'd been terminated the day after his suspension when Human Resources realized he'd misrepresented his qualifications on his job application. Margaret Torres presented the findings. 3 houses with major electrical violations, 14 instances of code violations, forged approval documents, and irrefutable evidence that supervision requirements had been ignored for over 2 weeks. The estimated cost to bring everything into compliance was a staggering $430,000. In addition, Margaret continued, the state is referring this case to the Attorney General for prosecution of fraudulent contractor practices and document forgery. Curtis sat quietly in the corner, taking notes, officially there as a consulting witness, but privately enjoying the look on Jacob Morrison's face as the numbers piled up. $430,000 in direct costs, plus legal fees, plus potential lawsuits from buyers, plus irreversible reputation damage to Hollowgate's bonding capacity. The corporate lawyer asked the question everyone was thinking. How did this happen? Margaret opened Curtis's file. The original compliance supervisor, Curtis Bell, had an excellent track record, 0 violations in 20 years, commendations from multiple inspection agencies. He was replaced by someone with no construction experience who failed to verify contractor licenses and approved obviously fraudulent documentation. Jacob Morrison tried to speak. We were implementing new efficiency protocols. You were cutting corners, Margaret interrupted, her voice firm. And when your corners got cut, 3 families almost moved into houses with electrical systems that could have killed them. The state recommends that Hollowgate retain Curtis Bell as compliance supervisor for all remaining phases of this project, Margaret concluded. He knows the development, understands the issues, and has the trust of our inspection team. All eyes turned to Curtis. 3 weeks ago, Jacob Morrison had dismissed him for being too rigid. Now, the state was effectively demanding that Hollowgate hire him back to fix the monumental mess Jacob had created. Mr. Bell, the corporate lawyer said, would you be interested in resuming your position as a consultant? With direct reporting authority to the state compliance team, Curtis specified. Jacob Morrison's face flushed crimson, but he couldn't object. Hollowgate desperately needed state approval to continue the project, and the state would only grant that approval with him supervising the work. 6 months later, Curtis was drinking coffee in his new, spacious office when Bill Santos knocked on the door. He'd been hired permanently as Regional Compliance Director, with authority over 3 major development projects and a salary bump that made the entire ordeal worthwhile. Heard from Margaret Torres today, Bill said. Danny Vance pleaded guilty to contractor fraud. 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, permanently banned from holding an electrical license. Bill continued. Trevor Banks was terminated the day after his suspension when Human Resources realized he'd misrepresented his qualifications on his job application. He found a job selling insurance in Tucson. Apparently his resume doesn't mention the 2 weeks he spent in construction. Jacob Morrison had lasted another month after the investigation concluded. Corporate finally realized that his efficiency protocols had created significant problems, costing the company far more than his entire annual salary. Efficiency experts who caused such extensive financial damage weren't the kind of efficiency they needed. Claire brought Rebecca to the office that afternoon. Both of them toured the new space while Curtis finished some paperwork. His daughter seemed genuinely impressed by the view of the sprawling construction sites he now supervised, projects where every contractor was licensed, every approval was genuine, and every signature was actually his. "Dad," Rebecca said, "my engineering professor says that people who do things right the first time never get famous, but people who fix other people's mistakes get promoted." "Smart professor," Curtis chuckled. "She also said that revenge is a dish best served with proper documentation and state regulatory compliance." Curtis laughed. "Did she really say that?" "No," Rebecca admitted, "but she should have." Driving home that evening, Curtis passed the Sunrise Hills development. 3 families had moved into the houses we'd spent 2 months fixing, houses that were now among the safest residential constructions in Arizona. Every wire properly installed, every connection up to code, every system meticulously tested and certified. Sometimes doing the right thing took longer than expected, but it always worked out in the end. Thank you for watching this powerful story on Life Stories. 1. If you were moved by Curtis's unwavering commitment to integrity and safety, please subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. Your support helps us continue sharing these impactful narratives.